Wonderful. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon here from Atlanta, where, where I'm at. Thank you for joining us for another Modern Sales Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanjy. We're just going to let everyone kind of have a couple minutes to join here. We have a really amazing guest today, a very seasoned entrepreneurial sales leader in the form of Eileen. I'm going to hopefully not mispronounce this. Wiens. Was that okay? All right,
Yes, that
cool.
was perfect.
Delightful. Eileen is joining us from San Jose, California. So while folks are trickling in here, Eileen, do you have any like travel coming up in the near future? Anything kind of cool to look forward to?
Yes, absolutely. I'm counting the chill for a good 10 days.
Oh man, that will be absolutely fantastic. Yes, I'm looking forward to getting back to California from Atlanta because I took the red eye out here like a complete nincompoop, and and I've been like regretting it for the last 3 days. So that's been fantastic. Cool. While we have folks coming in here, would love for folks to kind of get familiar with some of the Zoom webinar interface. So this event, we encourage audience participation as much as possible. Please use the chat panel. You can leverage the Q&A panel and so on. Let us know where you're kind of coming in from. And for folks who are just joining, welcome to Power Hour. If you've never been here before. So for folks who are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. So MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and related disciplines. The community's mission is to create an environment for our 30,000 and growing members to answer questions they struggle to answer on their own, help them see around corners that they may not know about. And the way that we do this, of course, is through great live sessions like this, by bringing together really amazing people who have lots and lots of awesome expertise, like Eileen. So for folks who were not previously admitted to MSP, you'll be added after the event. Before we just get started, a couple of reminders. Power Hours, kind of a unique format. There's not a specific piece of content that we're going to talk through. Rather, that what we're doing is rapid fire Q&A here with our illustrious guest. Eileen's had a really amazing career, and she's had a lot of different sales leadership roles across a lot of different really cool companies. And so the idea here is for you to ask your questions. We had a bunch that kind of came in ahead of time as well that we'll kind of get into. So use your chat tab to interact with your peers, etc. So kind of with all of that, I'd love to do a little bit of introductions here. I'll make mine super quick. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm the founder of Atrium. We make data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, so AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers use metrics and data to improve team performance. And I'm also the founder of Modern Sales Pros. And Eileen, I would love for you to kind of introduce yourself, tell folks a little bit about Mountain, and then maybe the last couple of roles that you had before getting into programmatic television advertising.
Well, thank you, first of all, Pete, for having me. I was super excited to join you today. But today, I am the SVP of sales at a company called Mountain. We are a self-service software platform that allows advertisers to launch connected TV campaigns that focus on conversion and revenue. It's different from traditional television. We run alongside traditional marketing channels like paid search and social. And so, simply put, we help brands target their ideal customer. We allow for them to upload commercials and creative, serve up ads onto your home television, and then retarget that customer on all the devices in the home until they convert to either like a purchase, a sign up, a registration, a demo. It's pretty creepy because so the next time you're watching streaming television and you see an ad that's relevant to you and you start to see ads appear on your telephone or iPad, it's most likely Mountain that's serving up that advertising.
I love it. It's kind of like the old joke about like, I know that 50% of my marketing spend is wasted, but I don't know which 50%. In this case, it's like, hey, we're actually just gonna make it such that that's like slowly going away over time. But like TV has been one of the last bastions of that because it's like
Yes.
so hard to
Yeah.
target, and you guys solve that. And then maybe you can tell folks a little bit about the kind of the previous roles, because you
Yeah.
come from a SaaS background, like very different
Yes.
than media sales before that.
Media sales is really different, and we'll talk certainly about that.
Yeah.
Previous to that, I spent 5.5 years at an ERP company called Sage Intact. We focused on sort of small to mid market companies selling accounting and financial software. I held both sales, strategy, and operational roles while I was there. It was a fantastic run. And
Yeah.
prior to that, I was at a startup company called ToutApp.
Yeah.
ToutApp was very much, they were the early outreach and
Innovators.
sales law.
Yep.
And that was a Series A company. That was a fantastic experience based out of San Francisco. Prior to that, I was with another fun company called Hoopla. That
Yep.
was all about, sales engagement, leaderboards, sort
Yeah.
of the ESPN leaderboards that you see at companies. That was another Series A to Series B company. I was there for about 2.5 years, and it goes way, way back. And if you're really interested, you can scroll through my LinkedIn.
Well, it's
But
such an
primarily all
amazing,
fast.
yeah, it's such an amazing like eclectic background, especially because like a lot of people don't do like different stages like that, and then
Mhm,
now you're
mhm.
in like the me sales mission is totally different. I think that that's something I would love for us to kind of like start on there, because there are a lot of media sales organizations in the modern sales community. What was like the biggest change going from a SaaS background? And I know that like Sage Intacct was like a little bit higher ASP as well. So you're going from like SaaS high ASP to like, to media sales. But like even compared to your experience at Tout and Hoopla and so on and so
Yeah.
forth, like what have been the biggest transitions there moving to media sales?
Well, interestingly enough, at Intact, I would say it was about a 50,000 ASP. But
Yep.
what was really compelling there was customer lifetime value. Customer lifetime value at Sage Intact was like 10 years, right?
Oh,
So that,
totally.
so it's a different optic. In the
Locked
media,
in.
yes, you're locked in. It's a very considered purchase.
Yeah.
Media sales is completely different. Now, what's been interesting about that is, the ASP for television is actually, higher than you would think when you think about search and social, right? If
Right.
you've ever sold search and social, it may be a couple $100, $1,000 here and there, but really
Yep.
in television, you're talking about $35,000 a month,
Hmm.
right? So that's a pretty big investment on connected television. So,
Wow.
um, interestingly enough, though, the shift from SaaS to media sales, it's what it was interesting. So when I take a look at it, for me, the biggest change was having to think differently about the sales motion.
Yeah. How's it different?
Sort of because on media sales, you don't recognize the revenue, you don't pay on commission
Hmm.
until the brand starts spending and consuming, right?
Hmm.
Spending their budget on
Hmm.
connected TV. So even if you secure a deal for 35,000 and they don't start spending until May, this,
Hmm.
we don't start recognizing and paying on that deal until May,
Yeah.
right? However, one of the reasons why Mountain hired me is because they really wanted that sort of SaaS sales motion, that predictable
Hmm.
motion that you could, that they wanted to adopt, right? Because it's media, but it's, the reality is we're a software platform, so
Yeah.
we sort of are in between that traditional media look and truly a SaaS model, right?
Yeah.
Sales
Because
model.
I feel that like on the one hand, like as a seller or a sales manager, the
Mhm.
notion of like being reliant on like performance in some sort of capacity, like in this case, like are they actually spending, are they launching, et cetera, kind of like makes you clench, like, oh man, I'm afraid,
Yes.
right? Like versus, hey, we got a 12-month contract, we got a 24-month contract, whatever, like we've got time to success this person, this account, et cetera, et cetera. But on the flip side, though, it actually like drives a lot of really good alignment, right? Insofar as like if the customer is not seeing value, they're going to stop spending, right? Kind of like
Correct.
usage based. You're seeing this more and more in like usage based software companies. Like we have a number of Atrium has like a number of customers who do usage based stuff. So like Checker, Trip Actions was one, Clearbit, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. So like it drives that attention, but it can also be a distraction too, because like the sellers they're not actually responsible for like successing and launching, but if they're not going to get paid until like it actually launches and like usage happens, then maybe they're going to bird dog that. But if they're not their responsibility, they're kind of like back drive in on like the CSM or whatever. How do you guys contend with that?
So that's a great question. There is still some level of engagement that our AEs do
Hmm.
participate in. They participate in the kickoff call when we start to basically onboard the customer. They participate in like the 7 and 30 day check-ins. They
Yeah.
stay in touch because sometimes what happens is these advertisers, they sort of come in and come out sometimes. And
Yeah.
so the relationship has sits with the sales rep. That's a little
Right.
different too. It's like it's not really new. And
Sure. It's
so
like they
the
came
sales
back.
rep,
They stopped spending 3 months ago. They took a break.
yeah,
Now they're coming back because they got a big new campaign and they want to spend
yeah.
on Mountain more.
Yes. And so ideally we're moving towards this model where it's just we keep them on constantly. It evolves into a recurring 12-month commitment without all the
Right.
contracts, right? And so, one of the things that we've done this year is um, we want good business and we want great campaigns and great success for our customers. So I've also shifted the compensation plan to
Nice.
be, there's a trial commission, and then there is a premium rate. That premium rate
Interesting.
steps in and it's double the standard rate when the
Mm.
customer comes out of trial. So it means we've done all of the right things during the trial. We support them, we ensure their success. But at the same time, they really kick off it allows also the platform to optimize. And
Mm.
and then when we get into that fourth month, they really get to see the benefits of that. So essentially what I've done is I've compressed what they would have earned in a 12-month window for this advertiser into a 6 month. So they can make the same money they did last month over 12 months with the customer, they can make it in 6,
Right.
right? They just need to work the comp plan.
But importantly, like really focused on doing like making sure the customer is successful and having like good
Yeah.
alignment there, and not really, yeah, not you're like, yeah, just try it out, just try it out, just try it out, just try it out. Because if you
Yeah.
do that, you end up with like a bunch of things that like turn out after a month, turn out after 2 months or whatever, which is probably not
Yeah.
super fun for customer success.
No, not at all. And that's not what I mean. That's the reason why we did this is that we didn't want to have quick churn out of
Yeah, yeah,
trial. And the way you do that is that, you sort of hang the carrot a little further out on
totals.
where you want it. And, the other thing that we're doing is we're making some adjustments this year to the sales motion to
Mhm.
make sure that we're messaging it, that, the intentions are clear. This is not just try it out and be done with it, but really intended to try it out with success. You're committed to continuing to spend on the platform.
Yeah, and I feel that that's something that you can do over like as an organization gets more like market presence. Like, I'm sure like 2 or 3 years ago, it was like, programmatic advertising and connected TV. Like what? Like what? What's
Yeah.
that? Whereas like now it's like, oh yeah, Mountain Duh, right? And so
Yeah.
whereas like so that back then it was like, give it a try, give it a try, give it a try, give it a try, and like sometimes you have to do that stuff, right? So we kind of have like a similar thing as well, because we like to describe what we do at Atrium as data-driven sales management software, and it's a fairly new category of concept, right? Like to use data to improve rep performance, and so we have a very easy in motion, where it takes like 5 minutes to set up an Atrium account, et cetera, et cetera. And so like our AEs are fully lined up around like getting as many accounts set up as possible, because then seeing is believing. Maybe in like 2 years from now or 3 years from now, like we'll lead with the the 2-year contract or whatever, once you have that market presence. And so I think being agile and saying like, okay, cool, the thing that we did last year, the year before, where like it was maybe a little
Yeah.
churny, like we were being scrappy, now we don't have to do that anymore, because we bought Ryan Reynolds and we just bring him to all the to all the closing calls. That actually is something I wanted to ask about, is
Yeah.
because I know that you guys have been doing a bunch of acquisitions, which is pretty cool. I would
Mhm.
imagine that a gate on historically, a gate on doing TV has been like high quality creative. And so I wonder
Yes.
how like the professional, because like at Sage Intacct, there was like a big I imagine there was like a big pro serve component to it to like get everything dialed in or like move them off their old ERP or whatever. You guys have like a different kind of pro serve. How does that mix with you guys' sales motion? Like, is it
Yeah,
helping
it's
with win rates, or like how does that work?
well, yeah, definitely. I think when I take a look at those are wildly different, but I mean, like at Sage Intacct, we had services were required. You couldn't buy the software
Of course.
without services, and the service ratio could have been 1 to 1 from a dollar perspective. At Mountain, when I think about service, it's self-serve platform, but one of the dependencies on doing connected television and performance television at that is great creative,
Yeah.
right? Creative that is compelling, that it gets people to act. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that we've been really hyper focused on in the last year has been, for me, I look at it from a sales lens. My
Yeah.
biggest competitor is not another company. It's no decision or no action. And that
Yeah.
typically trailed back to the client didn't have creative. And
Yeah.
so a couple of different things. Like, so I'll start with our most recent acquisition was a company called QuickFrame,
I
and
saw
that's
that.
yeah. So they were a partner of ours. We would go to
Okay.
them and introduce them to advertisers who needed creative, and they do creative
Yeah.
for connected TV. They also do creative for social, and
Oh yeah.
social explainer videos, any kind of creative that you want, right? I think one of the things that is really compelling there is that TV creative has traditionally been super expensive. So whenever you see
Yeah.
commercial on TV, you're like, that had to have been millions of dollars,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When in actuality, you can get a commercial for a very reasonable amount of money. So we through QuickFrame, we have the ability in which to do that. With Maximum Effort,
Yeah.
which is the company, it's the creative agency that Ryan Reynolds was a part of. So he's on our board. He's our chief creative officer. He's very
Yeah.
participatory in the business. I think people are surprised by that because he's an actor, but he it does take time off, and during those times, he's very much engaged in all of his businesses. So, I told you this earlier, Pete. He's a fantastic SDR,
Yeah.
right? So he's been fantastic in getting us in front of the right brands and the right people to demonstrate how successful advertisers can be on our platform. So, but creative is critical, and we talk about this concept of fast advertising, right? So
Oh,
one of the things
interesting.
Max
Yeah.
Effort has been able to do is they have sort of mastered, how do you get ads out from concept
Yeah.
to broadcast within days.
Like
And
The Peloton lady, right? Where
yep, the Peloton lady,
they turned around the
yeah,
ad on Peloton lady for what is it? Aviation or Aviator Gin or
aviation
whatever.
gin. Yeah.
Yeah, that was
So
insane. It was like it was like 3 days later, and it was like really
yeah.
good too, like funny, like AF.
Yeah, and then there was the Peloton ad with, that got, we it got panned a little bit, but it was really cool. It was on the heels of the Sex and the City, Mr. Big
Oh,
dying after riding the Peloton. There was that. We recently launched two other commercials through our Max Effort
yeah.
colleagues, and that was a Sarah McLachlan
Mhm.
commercial for Bolt.
Mm,
So it's an e-commerce B2B company. And
mhm.
then we launched one yesterday with Ryan for 1Password.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, that came out yesterday. But these things are very fast moving. And they typically all get done in, a single day. Some of these things get done in, the filming and everything, but
But I
it's
think there's
very,
a
very,
really good lesson there for like a lot of startups is you have to think about whatever the constraint is that's like
mhm.
preventing the close. And like and there's a variety of ways that we can solve that. Like as sellers, we try to like objection handle, right? Or like, yeah, like Jedi mind trick it, be like, that doesn't matter, these aren't the droids you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes what that can be is that can be professional services, or it can be like new features or whatever, what have you, but just like focus on like whatever it is that's like that's in the critical path from the close. And then the other like, and that can be really important, even after you've solved it, like you, whether you have the professional services in place or the feature exists or whatever, I think this is something that I talk with my account executives about quite a bit. When you have a disruptive technology that's a new category, what you're combating is all these preconceived notions. And so what you were just talking about really
Mhm.
resonated with me around like people think like, oh, well, like TV has to be expensive. The problem is if like a mountain seller goes into a conversation without considering the fact that somebody is like probably has that in the back of their mind, well, like,
Mhm.
that's going to be a drag on the conversation versus like proactively kind of almost like pre-objection handling that and like getting ahead of those like implicit biases, whatever they happen to be for your business. And then eventually people kind of like, and then they work their way out over time where like people no longer think like, oh yeah, connected TV, that's like, you can turn around creative really quickly. But in like the next 24 months, you're still going to be like combating those preconceived notions.
And I look at it as there's a lot of education. So for
Totally.
what we do, yeah, so for what we do, it primarily in the direct consumer, those are
Yeah.
are educated buyers, right? They're used to doing it. What we're educating them
Oh,
on is that
sure.
television doesn't have to be just brand awareness.
Right.
Television can now be about conversions and driving revenue and measuring
Yep.
it where they haven't been able to do it before,
Yep.
right? And so, but and then also as we open up other markets, right? And I mentioned 1Password and Bolt; those are
I like
B2B
B2B.
companies.
Yep.
Yeah, B2B. This is all new for B2B because the
Totally.
reality is, the return on search and social is diminishing. People are
Yep.
looking for alternative channels. With the pandemic, streaming, we all got hooked on streaming TV. I admit, how many people binge watch shows? That's
the,
a
the
topic of
the number
conversation
of
over dinner.
the number of streaming like accounts that I'm connected to right now is like astronomical. It's like absolutely ridiculous. So yes,
I bet you you're
I'm
paying more now in
probably.
streaming subscriptions than you did with cable TV.
Yeah, but like, it's Disney Plus and my son likes it, so like whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so like the
Left
volume,
in the morning.
so the volume is going up, but yeah, there's a lot of education going on there. Um,
Tons of education. Right.
yeah, there was so changing gears a little bit here. One thing
Mhm.
that I wanted to kind of like ask you about is, you're in a pretty rarefied position at Mountain where I think you have like a half dozen to like, a dozen managers um under you. And so like
Mhm.
and then of course when you were at Hoopla, you probably had, AEs going straight into you, tout app probably the same thing. And so I guess what my question there would be is like, what do you like? What are some of the biggest challenges and like your solutions there too when you're managing managers? Because one of the things like the metaphor I kind of like to use about that is like it's kind of like trying to like parallel park like a big rig, right? Because
Mhm.
it's like moving like this, like you're backing up, and it's like like you can't just like go and grab the account executive. So like how like when you're managing through other people
Yeah.
like what changes?
You know, and I'm listening to you talk about that. I'm like, okay, so what is it? What makes it so wildly different? Um, a lot of it is empowering your leaders to do
Totally.
what needs to be done. I think you have to trust because people, and we've all been in these situations where somebody's coming down over you into the
Yeah.
front line
Yep.
and things like that. It has a lot to do with trust,
Sure.
right? I've got to believe in my leaders. I've got to trust that they can do the job. And then I've got to step back and let them, one is that I got to be clear in communication to them. And then I need to step back and let them do it. And I need to coach them. I need to have a
Yep.
commitment of coaching and to let it play out a little bit. And, I've done that. And because I'm a typical type A, like control, control, control. So it's like when you move into that sort of second level, you need to really let things go. And now I'm sort of like, I've got 3 levels down to the front line on some
Oh yeah.
cases. And so, but at the same time, what I have to do is I have to make sure I stay in touch with what's happening.
Yep.
Right. That's my challenge is to make sure I'm staying in touch with it because then you get too many layers. But really, it's about empowerment and
Yep.
trust.
Yeah, for sure. Like I was just what you were mentioning there about like coaching, I can't remember if it was yesterday or the day before. There's so many of them. I was doing a master class on data-driven coaching and talking
Mhm.
about how one of the things that Gartner always talks about is like how first line management is like so impactful for your reps, because like that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where you're gonna like get high leverage of kind of like correction and what have you. But of course the problem is that a lot of people don't, like when you think about enablement resources, they go to the reps, they don't go to the managers, right? Like we put effort into the reps around like, you know, talk tracks and objection handles and,
Yeah.
you know, sales training and whatever, but like what about manager training? And I what kind of, and like teaching them to coach. Now the funny thing is, like, what about the meta coaching that you were just talking about? Like, how do you coach the coaches? And like I was kind of thinking that through, like how would you even do that? It's like, is it riding along with them on a one-on-one and just like observing how they do that, or like how do you coach coaching?
So that's an interesting question. I think what I like to do is I typically coach through behavior. So like we talk in one-on-ones, we talk about situational things, right?
Sure.
And that's typically, but then you got to sort of unpack it and go, okay, well, tell me what's happening. What was your role in it? How did you do this? What did you suggest? Here's a thought. Here's something to think about. And getting them. I'm not a huge, my coaching style is not like telling people you're doing it wrong. You should do this. You should do that. I go, what about this? I give them a couple of options or help me understand why you chose that direction.
Right.
Right. I've also let people sort of like, you want to keep doing it that way? Let's write it out. Let's see what happens.
The
You
old
know,
uh
and
the old provocative discovery question, right?
yes,
How does what would be the implications associated with
yeah,
continuing to do it that way? What do you think's
I
going to
was
happen there?
I was drilled at a very early part of my career with open-ended questioning, so I can open-end the crap out of stuff.
Yeah,
So,
it's funny. Like, one of my favorite books on sales coaching is Five Secrets of the Sales Coach by Corey Bray. And it's so funny, like the coaching framework that they talk about is like kind of like epic, where you're like, what is
mhm,
the thing that we're trying to change,
yeah,
right? Like, how are we going to measure whether or not it's been changed or not? Or like, what's the business initiative? What's the metric in question? What's the positive impact? And like the personal positive impact, like, oh, I'm going to get rid of my student debt, I'm going to be able to buy that
yeah,
Beamer, or like fill in the blank. What's the negative implication, right? Okay,
mhm.
well, what happens if you don't? Right? And then there's like the project plan. um yeah, and I think that like helping managers kind of like, because we have these like sales behaviors that we're used to from being sellers, but remarkably you can apply a lot of those, not just from like a persuasion standpoint, because like that's
Mhm.
like bad selling, just like, oh, I'm just gonna like convince you to do the thing, versus like leading people along, right, to kind of
Yeah.
like like understand on their own.
And
um
I think one of the challenges also is like, they're living sort of the front line. So our
yeah,
job is to sort of help them zoom out,
yeah,
to take a look at and assess the whole, because they're sort of living in the weeds. And so I look at it as like, let's zoom out, let's take a look at it.
yeah,
And sometimes you arrive at different conclusions, right? Or different action
yeah.
plans with
I
that.
think one of the things that I've appreciated, because at Atrium now we're at like a dozen sellers. I can't believe that I don't have line management yet. Working on it. Um, but what ends up happening is you get more and more and more people, and then also that new level of line management, um, is you got to start like having consistency of like certain behaviors, which means like documentation and like slides and like like essentially taking the things that like otherwise were just like between your ears, and then turning them
Mhm.
into text and pictures and so on and so forth. What are some of the things that you do, that you guys do around kind of like consistentizing the managerial cadence, or is it more kind of like different strokes for different folks?
I would say organizationally, we have really focused on, so we've got a really nice sort of setup between, sales leadership, frontline leadership, the reps. We've got leads on teams that
Nice.
participate and work with learning and development, which is where enablement comes under. So I have enablement program managers for both the SDR and the AE function, and that we
Oh, nice.
collaborate with them and RevOps, and really, it is a team effort to put together all of the documentation on
Hmm.
what it takes to be successful in the role. right? We have,
Yeah.
I call it, we have to institutionalize everything that we know into documentations. And so over the last year, we had lots of one-off documents, and now it's trying to compress it all. And then also being able to deliver it in different formats, right? So you can go read about it, you can go listen to, a quick webinar on it. And, we use technology like Litmus to serve that up. We have classroom environments. We put together, we have, sort of a buddy system. And so we try and create all of this sort of, touch points
Mhm.
where people feel like they're going to be set up for success.
Yeah, it's funny. Like again, so many of the things are kind of like reminiscent of like the sales part of what we do versus like the machine, the selling machine,
Yeah.
which is what we're talking
Yeah.
about. It's like, oh, we've got this like tribal knowledge around our sales motion, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's like unify that into a sales playbook, right? Like
Yes.
instead of all this stuff being everywhere, it's just like one Google document or one Notion doc or whatever. Yeah, maybe it's got like hyperlinks going off other places. And then now you've got like, okay, like this is the sales motion, this is how to run a deal and all the like twists and turns and what have you, right? Now you've got the meta version of that, which is, okay, how does the business run? How does our sales machine run? This is what our operating rhythm is. These are the type of internal meetings that we have in order to drive that rhythm. These are the content of those meetings. These are the agenda documents that you should be
Hmm.
using for that, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and I think the challenges are, I'm guilty of this, is that when you're trying to like run a gun and like make your number, sometimes it can be very difficult to like block out the time in the calendar in order to do that essentially like technical debt discharge
Hmm.
behavior. They're like, oh, we got these documents all over the place. Well, they're like, people know where they are, versus like, do they really, are they really using them, versus like, okay, let's clear our calendar, put 4 hours on the calendar in order to like harmonize that. And then, oh, wow, that was really valuable after the fact. I mean, it's super tough to kind of like make space for that.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations on how to do a better job of that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we do that I haven't done anywhere else, but it seems to work really well here, has
Hmm.
been you work it like a project.
Yeah.
And we're a huge believer in stand-ups. So we'll do stand-ups for 15 minutes, 30 minutes and go,
Yeah.
great, where are you at with this? We're going to meet again in 3 days, and everybody expects progress.
Yeah.
And so it's a forcing function at the end of the day. It's like, could I fill my day with stuff and not get to this? Absolutely. But if I know I'm going to have to give everybody an update in 3 days,
Accountability. Love it.
yes, I'm absolutely fine 30 minutes out of my day to chip away at this. And it's also, it all also allows for you to go, look, how am I going to get this done? And in some cases, you might need to delegate it out, or you bring in an
Yeah.
additional team member. It's like what I mentioned to you earlier. We have like team leads, and those
Yeah.
team leads
Exactly.
are future leadership. And so we give them the opportunity to participate in what we would term sort of leadership voice in some of these
Yep.
things, and they help us do some of the heavy lifting.
For sure, that is a huge thing. I'm blessed to have a team lead at Atrium. It's a gentleman named Sean Cardenas.
He's
He's
awesome.
Yeah, he's delightful. He's one of he was our senior rep, and then what can happen is you can get leverage from other folks. Like, so for instance, Sean does a bunch of our operating rhythm is like we have a Monday morning sales team meeting. It's the entire sales organization, look at metrics, et cetera, content, blah, 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 right? Then we have like daily stand-ups, 9 a.m. And then I have bi-weekly, so every other week, one-on-ones with the reps, which are coaching conversations. So it's like, how you doing? How you feeling? What's like bumming
Mhm.
you out? Etc. Like we probably have like a specific coaching thing that we're working on around like whatever the development area is. We're looking at the metrics in order to do that. Obviously, we use Atrium for that. And then, but what we do also have is we have deal strategy meetings. So like 30-minute meetings once a week with each rep, and like that's just to kind of help them think through like you know 3 4 5 deals. Like you're not going to be able to review like 40 ops. It's like 3 4 5 deals that are like stuck or whatever. What can we do about it? So like Sean has taken those over for me because like he's got the sales motion like grooved in his
Mhm.
brain, and so he's like, oh yeah, you have this problem right here, you have this problem right here, and like that gives me leverage so I can fly out to Atlanta to like recruit people or whatever. It's also fantastic for him. And this is something I've been doing with other reps as well. One of the things that I always push on my team about is that like we as sellers are like authors, like we are participatory authors of our sales motion. This is, I mean, we're pretty small, so like it's still in flux and evolving pretty heavily. And so, this has been something that's like very consistent in our culture where someone's like, hey, I have an idea around how like we can change the order of these slides right here. Or like, maybe if we like try to do the trial close here, it'll be higher conversion for somebody to turn on an account versus like waiting down here. And we'll do those experiments. And then if it's successful, it's like, oh, okay, cool. Your job is to clone the script and then like redocument it and then hand it back to me. And usually the rep is like, all right, that's awesome. But like that just removed an hour and a half of work from me, right? And like
Yeah,
gave them something that was like a professional development activity as well.
absolutely. No, I think those are great opportunities.
What you were kind of talking about institutionalization and documentation, what have you. I know that you guys recently went like fully remote, which is crazy because I know
Mhm.
when I first met back when you guys were Steelhouse, when I first met Chris, the COO over there, he was at the like new office that was like so awesome. It was like so smoking. What has been like the biggest change in going fully remote for you? Obviously, like the institutionalization and documentation is like now even more at a premium because like people can't just like lean over to the rep next to them.
Yeah.
What have been other big changes?
I joined the company, and the company was already fully remote. But with COVID
Hmm.
and the pandemic, the company decided to sort of pivot and said, "Look, we don't need to be in an office. We can work remote," and encourage people. You can live anywhere in the world as long as you're working our hours. So I had team members that were living in Tulum, Mexico. I have a
Huh,
sales leader today that lives in Colombia, South
what?
America. Yes,
What
he
time
works
zone is
central.
that?
He's in central time, so it works out beautifully.
Huh.
But I have people that have moved from LA because we were headquartered in LA. They've moved. They're in New York. They're in Florida. Everybody's all over the place, and we're still getting it done. We are still growing at over 200%. The biggest shift is making sure that you have the infrastructure internally to keep it going. The other thing that we are very much a Slack house,
No.
is that what we call it. So everything, you're discouraged to send email. Let's do it all in Slack. You collaborate. You're having all these small Slack chats and groups and things like that where you're trying to get things done. If I check email once or twice a day, that's how little I get. So a lot of that is collaboration, certainly promotes sort of that remote workforce. And then we do some things internally, to make sure we fortify what we miss in that face-to-face
Yeah.
engagement. You talked a little bit about this earlier. Each of my teams do newsrooms. So we do newsrooms 2 to 3 times a week. So each of the functional teams get together, and that's a time in which to update, to get people charged and excited. A little bit of, hey, what have you? How was your weekend? And getting that connection going. That happens. We do an all hands meeting every month to do recognition and review the metrics and performance overall. So that's great. One of the things that we're also doing is making sure we've created multiple levels in each role,
Mm,
right? So people feel like they're still getting progression, the micro promotions, if you will,
totally. Yeah.
and they're developing within the role, and it keeps them in their role maybe a little bit longer than you are because we're growing so fast. We
Yeah.
also created, we hired this incredible enablement team, and what they've been doing is we created a bridge program from
Mhm.
SDR to AE. And
I
so
love
one
it.
of the things I want to do is I'm trying to really compress ramp time for SDRs when they
Yeah.
become an AE. The other thing that we're doing a little bit differently is like the SDRs they work with AEs today, but they also work their own account book.
Hmm.
So if they become an AE, they're allowed to carve out accounts they've been already working for the last 6 to 12 months,
Mhm.
and they get to carry those forward and develop and continue to cultivate those relationships, which accelerates it. So we've got all this training that we're doing. We have all these sort of eyes. The managers are doing a lot of one-on-ones. The
Yeah.
other thing the company does is that we meet 4 times a year in
Hmm.
person at company offsites. So
I
we
love it.
last week we were in Austin. Austin during South by Southwest, that was a screaming, raging time.
Oh
I
my
equate
God.
these offsites to they're like President's Club.
Right.
You get swag, it's beautiful, everything's wonderful. For
Yeah.
the rest of this year, we're going to Napa Valley, Chicago, and Hawaii for the
So it's
company offsite.
every 3 months and then 3 days. Is that what you said?
3 days, there's a working day, and then there's a fun day. So
I lo-
I was shooting guns at the last one. It was sort of
when
fun,
when
skeet
when
shooting.
you say a working day, you mean like content and like training and stuff like that, or is
It's
that what that is?
there's a company session where everybody gets together, and then we peel off and we do breakout sessions. And so for my team, breakout sessions, they're usually one part like content and training, and things like that, and one part fun.
Sure.
So we did a like trivia game, cross functional, get everybody cross functionally working together, and then we
Yeah.
did like a friendly family feud with the
Ha.
buzzers and everything. So it was, and salespeople were not competitive at all,
No,
right?
not at all.
So it was a screaming good time.
Yeah, we just had an offsite recently. It was organized by one of our marketing managers, Hannah, and it was a screaming success. I think what was particularly compelling about it was um, things that came out. There was like whack-a-mole stuff that came out of it because we did
Mhm.
a bunch of like brainstorming around like go-to-market alignment and what have you. So there were like these discrete kind of like topics that came out. The other
Yeah.
thing that was cool though is like we realized the need for like embedding that in our operating cadence. So like, oh man,
Mhm.
a bunch of really great things came out of this go-to-market alignment brainstorm session, which was kind of like what you're describing. It was part brainstorm and like work, and we also had the like spaghetti marshmallow kind of like challenge to like build the biggest biggest structure or whatever. And so one of the things that came out of that though is like now we're doing monthly. We actually put together a go-to-market alignment council that has representation from like not only does it have all the leads from those different organizations, the different
Mhm.
functions like CS and AE and SDR and our BizOps team, but then it also has like a delegate, right? Like a tribute from the
Mhm.
team, which is like a nice little thing. Like they get a feather in their hat and they represent the team, and it's essentially like, hey, cool, we're coming together in order to figure out where's there a hitch in our giddy up, where is there friction, etc. Instinct like create those action items and then like start just like whacking those moles to get right. And so like there were a number of other things that kind of um came out of that offsite, like systematizing on a more frequent basis some of the
Mhm.
stuff that was being done there. Do you guys also have a president's club too, or is it just these three
No.
or these four things?
These 4 things, because it's
Yeah,
really the company as a whole, really, we come together and we benefit from that, and we're
totally.
greater in that format than having a president's club. And a lot of it looks and feels like a president's club to me, where
Totally.
it's a great location, it's tremendous, food and experience and all the things you would normally do on a president's club.
I love it. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think that those are one of the things that I found when like over the pandemic when people were really were working from home and not really like seeing other folks very much. We saw that we were able to do like things functionally. Like we were
Hmm.
functioning, we were doing it, like we were executing on things, but like what it was very difficult to observe the things that had gone like missing, that like the hallway high fives or kind of like getting
Yeah.
off a call and what have you. And if you don't fill those back in, it turns out that like they're not, it's not very observable but that they're gone, but there's kind of like this, it's like this thing in the back of your head of kind of drag. And it sounds like the offsite has really kind of helped with that. How else has like going full remote impacted you guys? I imagine like if you got people living all over the place, you're probably hiring all over the place.
Yes. So, I came from an environment where everyone was in office.
Yeah.
Even in the pandemic, we were still hiring for people locally to the office. And
Yeah.
at Mountain, it was hire from anywhere. And I will say, from a hiring manager's perspective, it was utopia. in the sense of like, I can hire amazing talent who is located across the US.
Hmm.
And we were able to fill, I mean, we hired 30 SDRs in probably 6 weeks, right?
Oh
And
my
they
goodness.
and incredible talent, and we did it all with our own internal recruiting resources. Normally, if I was going to do something like that, where I had to have people in office, there was a good chance I was going to have to outsource some of
Right.
that. And we were able to do it all with our internal resources. So that's been fantastic, right? And I think people stay longer because there's not this pressure, right? There's not this pressure of, wherever you're physically located at. We've had, people, we have people on the team that are like, I can go move and buy a house, and, I'm no longer living where the job was, where I couldn't afford
Right.
anything. So I think it's given a lot of freedom and a lot more happiness to our
How is
team
that?
members.
How has that changed how you guys do management though? Like, are you trying to co-locate um, like in time zones, like managers with their reports, or do like people shift their schedules, or how does like how does like management work
Yeah.
in a remote environment like that?
I went into it thinking we needed like, hey, we need so many people in geographies, or like you manage these people because they're on the same coast as you.
Yeah.
We've sort of played with that a little bit, but we really wanted the best talent. And so we've
Mhm.
sort of unofficially come to an agreement where people sort of cross over to different managers if they need coverage,
Mhm.
right? So if let's take an SDR manager that's located in New York, he's got a West Coast team member, he's available, but when that manager sort of signs off for the day, the West Coast located manager sort of steps in, right? And
Mhm.
they just sort of have this sort of, hey, and it also gives people exposure to different kinds of leadership, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that's actually been a real benefit. And there is
Yeah.
definitely this, amongst the leadership team is like, you can ask anybody to help you out. It doesn't have to
Right.
be just that one person. So it has allowed for us to have some freedom and not having to align geographically, because I think the whole geographic, like regions and stuff, you can just sort of has gone away. There are no lines any longer.
Yeah. These are it's so funny. Like these are all like big company problems. I mean, obviously, Mountain's not like super giant
Yeah.
company, but like, but still, these are kind of like big company problems when you have 20 managers or what have you. This is quite a bit different than some of the smaller startups that you worked at. So like Tout, Hoopla, etc. Um, what are kind of like the biggest upsides of those little ones versus the big ones, and what are the downsides of them? And
Um,
conversely, what's the upsides of the larger organizations? Because I guess your last two have been like Sage and Tech's like fairly substantial sales organization, and obviously Mountain is on its
you
merry
would
way.
think so. The sales organization at Sage was probably about the size of what I have today. There
Oh,
was
okay.
more SDRs. Sage was like 70 SDRs and about, 35, 40 sales reps. Right
Oh,
now,
right, because it's like
yeah,
SMB, it's like SMB accounting software and stuff like
yeah,
that. So, yep.
yeah.
Okay,
And there was a
gotcha. Okay.
channel, right? There was a channel. So that's a
Oh,
whole different thing, right? At Mountain, we're about 25 sellers and about, we're going to have about 60 SDRs this year, right? So
yep.
so it's growing. I think back, I think back to the Series A and Series B companies. I would be a little different. I think in those size companies, I've learned a lot since then. But I think, the things that I think about that are just sort of, if you're at that size company, you got to get the enablement right, and you got to
Mhm.
hire awesome people,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that, and then you have to have a process, a well-defined process, because you can't adapt and adjust unless you know what you're measuring against,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I remember, I think back when I was at ToutApp, and my CEO was like, "We got to have a playbook. It's got to be in place." And so it was like his mantra, and he was so right, right? And I was back then, I was still sort of, the sales leader that sort of there was a little bit of gut that you're still, operated off of. But really over the last like 15 years, it's really about, you really have to institutionalize everything. And so you need to know where you're at and where you're going so you can see if you're on that path. And so that's so different than what I grew up in sales.
Yeah.
right? And just sort of how it's transformed over the last 25 years.
Sales has definitely transitioned very substantially there. Like I think the first thing what that you kind of note there is the early hires, you got to get them right. Um,
Hmm.
because like there's not a lot of margin for error.
No,
Because if you've got like three AEs and like one of them like sucks, right?
that
Like
never
you've got
happens. Steve, that
like
never happens.
you've got a whole like you a third of your quota capacity is gone. Like holy crap,
Yeah.
that's like
Well,
a
and you
lot.
better fail fast, right? You got to fail fast in that environment. And so,
Oh
yes,
my god.
definitely what you hire for your profile early in a
Yeah.
smaller company may be very different, right? On what you can do and the risks you can take as you scale, right? And
Yeah.
so, but you need, to me, it's all about you have to have grit, which is
Yeah.
really hard to assess sometimes. Somebody who's grit, somebody who's agile, who who has clock speed, right?
Yes.
Clock speed is sort of the
Yeah,
intellectual
fixes. Yeah,
capacity.
they'll like figure it out, right? Like they're
Yeah.
bright.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And they've got drive. And those are all qualities you can't teach someone.
Yeah, you can teach them, data-driven sales management, or you can teach them,
Yes.
sales engagement, or you can teach them about like, programmatic TV or whatever. You like, like you can't fix lazy, right? Like you really can't teach,
Absolutely.
you can't teach. It's like, it's very difficult to teach hustle, right? Because like that's
Totally.
one of my favorite another one of my favorite books is or sales books is written by John McMahon, the Qualified Sales Leader. He was the former CRO of Parametric Technology Corporation. He's on the board at like Snowflake, a bunch of other things. Like he's been around the block. Um, and like in his book, he literally talks about the importance of recruiting for manager or for successful sales organizations. And like he actually just comes out and says it. And he's like, look, like if they haven't learned in their first 18 years on the planet, like how to execute, right, and
Yeah.
how to have like high follow through, or like how to have high accountability, you're not going to teach them. Like it's kind of done. And which is kind of like a pretty harsh like argument there, but like I buy it. And I see this like a lot. And every time because you know, I come from a product marketing background. My mom's a teacher and a professor, and so like I like to teach people, and like that includes my reps and prospects and what have you. So sometimes I fall into the trap of like, no, I can save them. I'm gonna
Yes.
teach them. I'm gonna save them, right? And like it
It's
doesn't work
it's a
out.
low, it's a slow death.
Yeah, and it doesn't work out, and then you're just like, oh man. And then I think the big problem there too is that, especially like early on, um if you've got 10 reps or you got 15 reps, and like one of them is like maybe a little bit of a spaz, and you're like, oh man, but like they went through onboarding, let's give 'em another chance, give 'em another chance, give 'em another chance. At least like the other 15 reps aren't being all that terribly like negatively impacted. If like you have one of those reps and like three, the other two are going to be like, you're not rowing very hard.
Yeah.
Why? Right. And then now you have like a morale problem. And
Yeah.
so this is like early stage. One of the ways I like to describe what you're trying to do is really get that like snowball rolling downhill. Right. And at the very beginning, it's like very small. Right. And then like once you start getting that going, right, from a cultural standpoint, then like great things can happen. Like you were talking about, like with
Yeah.
your team leads, what like you got some senior reps, you got some SDRs who've been promoted up, like the snowball's rolling. You throw a couple new AEs in there, and like, yeah, you got your onboarding processes and whatever. But like, even if there's cracks in that, like, guess what? They're stuck to the snowball. They're not going anywhere. They're on their merry way. And so like everything you can do to kind of get that going and avoid any sort of friction is really critical there.
Yeah.
Um,
And we've talked about, like, sometimes we're interviewing candidates and we're like, I said some of the criteria I mentioned, I said they're just sort of tenets we can't stray from. You can have a
yeah,
great conversation, but it doesn't mean they're going to be successful here. So we need to make sure we're vetting for that sort of for that profile, right? And also, you can only afford a certain number of people where the underperformance aggregates very quickly. And
yeah,
we sort of have, like you said, right, a larger company luxury problem. We're promoting all of our top performers,
yeah,
right? And so what happens with that is that I said you need to be elevating constantly. Your
Yeah.
people that are sort of in that 80 to 100%, let's figure out how to get them up. And then people that are underperforming, you need to figure out if there's a plan for them or not,
Yeah. Or get them
right?
out
And you
to
have
eat.
to do it quickly, right? Because the example you gave is like, you know, everybody's invested. When you're a frontline manager, you feel emotionally invested in somebody. I hired you, I brought you in, I really
Yeah.
believe in you. But, at some point you sort of have to, cut bait.
Yeah, for sure. I think the faster you can kind of create that SDR to AE to team lead to manager pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
it can be an amazing superpower. I was talking with Jeremy Donovan, who used to run, so he used to run sales
Yeah,
strategy with
sales off.
Sales Loft.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. He's over at Insight Partners now in their kind of center of excellence. And he and I were like shooting the shit the other day, and he was talking about quota attainment and like ramp time
Mm-hmm.
on AEs, and it was like so much faster for the SDR promos, even though like literally they would start taking ops at the same time. Like they would, like the SDR would like stop doing the SDR stuff, like go through like a month of training or whatever, maybe it was like 6 weeks, and they would start taking at bats. But their conversion rate on those early at bats just like blows
Mm-hmm.
away the folks that came in from, even if those like they're the more tenured sellers, like coming
Yeah.
in from like corporate executive board or like Zachary or like fill in the blank, right? Like these large like scaled sales organizations. And so early on you have to like go shopping out in the market to grab
Yeah.
quota capacity. But then later on, if you can like grow your own quota capacity internally, it's an amazing
Yeah.
superpower. And this is why one of the things that I constantly coach our SDR organization on is from a hiring standpoint is like, look, I know that you got to get a butt in a seat because like we have op generation goals that we gotta hit. But I don't want anyone coming into the organization that there's not a strong feeling that it's like high probability that they'll be able to matriculate to be an AE, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Or
Yeah. I
SDR
mean, we have
manager
the
or
same.
whatever.
Yeah. And we built the organization, when we started this about a year and a half ago, we started with the intention of we would have a large SDR organization that would be our bench.
Yeah,
Bench not only as AEs, but they also go into customer success,
totally.
right? And so, that's, and your metaphor around the snowball, we're sort of now at that point where, we
Yeah,
have a pretty steady amount of people getting promoted, right?
great.
And in less than 12 months, right around probably 9 to 12 months.
Exactly.
But and that we like try things out. Like, for me, I'm trying to figure out how do I compress? How do I compress? How do we ramp people faster? We love to try pilot things and test things out and see if we can make it sticky.
Yeah.
And that's the luxury of sort of where we're at right now and trying to, continue to sort of really hone the engine of what we're
Yeah.
doing. But I think it's great if if you're somebody coming in, you definitely see a career path
Oh yeah.
somewhere
You
within the
see the other
company.
ones. Yeah, you see other people
Yes.
being promoted before you. That was something that Jeremy also pointed out, because I think what you're describing is like a very enlightened way of thinking about like continuous improvement of a sales organization versus saying like, no way, like, when I was your age, ain't nobody getting promoted from SDR to AE in less than like 18 months because you had to walk up hill and the snow both ways, versus being like, hey, well, like that was then, and now we have like new technology, and like our targeting is way better, and like we have all this stuff. So like, why would you slavishly adhere to those old patterns? The other thing too that Jeremy noted to me was, because a lot of times people are like, yeah, we're not going to promote before like a year. But what was happening is, because of a hot market, other organizations would then pull those SDRs, and it was actually like creating, like, it was like destroying economic value, because like you would grab that SDR, pull them over here where they didn't have any subject matter expertise in this organization.
Yeah.
So now they're that slowly ramping like
Yeah.
AE at that other organization. Whereas like, okay, if we just like get them on their merry way here, we can, we're gonna get the benefit of this anyway. And they ended up starting to like promote SDRs at like month 9, month 10, month 11, and it worked out fine, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway,
We've done I've done we don't set any limits. We just set a performance level,
nice, I love
which
it.
has worked out as well. So,
Well, Eileen, we're actually we're up on time. So this was absolutely fantastic. I told you that it was like time was going to super fly, and it did.
Yep.
Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out. We have another. So next week we have another fantastic guest in the form of Steve Silver. He's a VP of Research of Sales Ops at Forrester. It's gonna be super fun. Eileen, you have a fantastic
Thank
weekend.
you.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Pete.
See
Appreciate
ya.
it.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.